The security footage was time-stamped 11:47 p.m., and Meredith Calloway had not been able to sleep anyway. She had been sitting at her desk in the home office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the back lawn, reviewing the quarterly projections for the third time that week, not because the numbers needed reviewing, but because stillness had become unbearable. The house was large and quiet in the way that expensive houses get when the person who made them feel like homes is no longer in them. 3 years since her husband died. 3 years of learning how to exist inside something that looked, from the outside, like a life. The alert came through the security app on her phone. Motion detected, West Garden. She almost ignored it. Probably the wind, probably a raccoon. The estate was 12 acres, and the motion sensors out back triggered at least twice a week for nothing. But something made her tap the notification anyway, and the screen filled with the night vision feed from the camera mounted above the garden shed. She stared. Her son was out there. Noah. 7 years old, still in his pajamas, the ones with the little rocket ships that he had refused to wash because he said they still smelled like his dad. He was sitting cross-legged in the grass near the stone wall at the far edge of the garden, and he was not alone. The man crouching beside him was Patrick, the groundskeeper she had hired 2 months ago through the estate management agency. She knew almost nothing about him except that his references were spotless. He showed up on time, and he never spoke unless spoken to, which, at the time, had seemed like exactly what she needed. Someone invisible. Someone who would not try to fill the silence with conversation she did not have the energy for. But he was not invisible now. He had his hands raised in front of a small lantern, and even on the grainy security feed, Meredith could see it clearly. He was making shadow figures on the stone wall. A bird, a rabbit. Something with long ears that Noah was pointing at, his whole face open and bright in a way she had not seen in. She could not remember how long. Noah was laughing. She sat very still for a long moment. The phone was trembling slightly in her hand, though she could not tell if her hand was shaking or if it was just the low resolution of the feed. Her son had not laughed like that, freely, without prompting, without her carefully engineering some activity or outing to coax it out of him, in almost 2 years. 2 years of therapists and school counselors and well-meaning relatives who kept saying he just needed time. He just needed time, as if grief had a schedule. She looked at the timestamp again. 11:47 p.m. Her first instinct was to be afraid. A man she barely knew, alone with her child, in the dark. She was already standing up, already moving toward the door, but something in the image stopped her. The way Noah was leaning slightly toward him, the way Patrick's posture was patient, the way he paused after each shadow figure as if waiting, as if asking permission before continuing. There was nothing hurried about it, nothing that looked like anything other than what it appeared to be. She went to the window instead and stood there in the dark, watching the garden below. She stood there for 11 minutes. She counted. When Noah finally came inside, through the back door, quiet and a little sheepish, clearly hoping not to be seen, she was waiting in the hallway. "Mom," he froze. "Come here," she said. He crossed the hallway slowly, bracing for something. She crouched down so they were eye level and looked at his face, still flushed, still carrying some residual brightness from whatever had just happened out there, and she felt something shift in her chest that she had no name for yet. "What were you doing outside?" she asked. He looked at the floor. "I couldn't sleep, so you went outside. At midnight." "It wasn't midnight. Noah." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said in a very small voice, "Patrick was still there. He does that sometimes. Stays late when he's finishing something, and he showed me the shadows before, when you were traveling. Just once. I asked him to do it again." Meredith was silent. "He told me it was okay with you," Noah added quickly, which was clearly a lie and clearly something he knew she could see through. "I mean, he didn't not tell me that." She pulled him into a hug that surprised both of them. He went stiff for half a second, the way he'd been doing lately, that slight resistance, like he was unsure if comfort was still something he was allowed to want, and then he folded into it. "Go to bed," she said into the top of his head. "We'll talk about this tomorrow." She meant it as a firm thing. She intended to have a firm, clear conversation in the morning about boundaries and safety and appropriate behavior. She intended to speak to Patrick and make clear that late-night interactions with her son were not part of his job description, that whatever kindness he thought he was offering needed to happen within set hours, within set parameters, within the very clear professional boundaries she had worked hard to maintain with every single person in this household. She fully intended all of that. Instead, she spent the rest of the night sitting at her desk, watching the rest of the security footage from the past 2 months. She found 6 other nights. Not every week, but scattered. A Thursday in March, 2 Tuesdays, a Sunday. Always late, always the West Garden, always the lantern. Sometimes Noah wasn't even there, and Patrick was just working. Fixing the stone wall in sections, planting something along the border, sharpening tools in the shed with the methodical patience of someone who found work calming. But 3 of the 6 nights, Noah had appeared. She could see the exact moment he slipped out the back door, the way Patrick looked up without surprise, as if he had heard him coming, as if he had been aware of the child the whole time without making it into something. On one of the recordings from a night in late February, she watched Patrick show Noah something with his hands. Not shadow figures this time, something smaller. A folded piece of paper, some kind of origami, a crane, she thought. Noah held it up and looked at it from every angle the way children examine things they find genuinely marvelous. And Patrick said something she couldn't hear, and Noah laughed. She rewound it, watched it 3 more times. She did not have the firm, clear conversation with Patrick in the morning. She went to work instead and sat through 4 hours of meetings and answered 47 emails and authorized 2 significant financial decisions and presented quarterly analysis to the board with the same composed precision she had refined over 15 years in asset management. And she did not think about the footage at all, not once, except for every moment between all of those things. She looked him up that evening, Patrick Doyle. The information from the staffing agency was standard. DOB, prior employment, references from 2 other estate properties in the area. She noticed he'd listed a gap in employment history, 2 years 2019 to 2021, filled with the vague phrase personal and family responsibilities. The agency had flagged it as verified but not detailed. She had not thought twice about it when she hired him. She thought about it now. She called the agency. "Can you tell me more about the employment gap in Patrick Doyle's file?" she asked. The woman on the phone was apologetic and circumspect. Privacy policies. She could confirm the gap was disclosed and the reference checks were completed. That was all she could say. Meredith thanked her and hung up, and then did what she always did when she needed to know something. She found it herself. It took her 3 evenings. She was not a private investigator, but she was a person who had spent her career learning how to read documents, cross-reference data, and find what was missing from a narrative by looking at what surrounded the absence. Patrick Doyle. Born 1984. Mechanical engineering degree from a state university in Ohio. Worked for a structural analysis firm in Columbus for 6 years, the kind of company that evaluated bridges and buildings for municipalities and contractors. Good work, steady career. Then, in March of 2019, a construction collapse in a mid-sized development project. 3 workers injured, 1 critically. The firm that hired the contractor was Callaway Meridian Capital, Meredith's firm. Not in name, not in any way she would have immediately recognized, but she knew the investment structure. She had helped build it. A multi-property development fund, one of the early ones, before she took over as CEO. She had inherited it when she moved up. Patrick Doyle had been the structural analyst who flagged safety concerns about that site 6 weeks before the collapse. He had written 2 internal memos. He had requested a formal review. He had been told by the contractors, by the project managers, by people who stood to lose significant delay costs that his concerns were unfounded, that the timeline would not be moved, that he was being unnecessarily cautious. He had not been there when the scaffolding failed, but he had been blamed anyway. The investigation that followed was quick and, she could see now, heavily shaped by legal teams that had significant incentive to find the smallest possible target. Patrick Doyle's memos, the ones that should have protected him, were reframed as evidence of negligence. He had known, the argument went, and had not escalated loudly enough. He lost his engineering license on a technicality. He lost his job. The lawsuit against the firm, the real firm, the capital firm, her firm, was settled quietly and quickly with NDAs before it ever became news. One of the injured workers died 8 months later from complications. He had a wife and 2 kids. Patrick had a daughter. She had been 4 years old at the time. He was raising her alone. His wife had left the year before. Meredith found that too, in a court record, undramatic and final. After he lost his license, he moved. Took whatever work he could find that didn't require credentials. Maintenance. Landscaping. He had been doing it for 5 years. His daughter's name was Blythe. She was 9 now. Meredith sat at her desk for a long time after that. The projections were open on the other monitor. The numbers were the same numbers they had always been. She thought about the scaffolding. She thought about the memos. She thought about the man in the garden, crouching beside her son with a lantern, patient and unhurried, making a paper crane out of nothing. She thought about what her firm had done, what she had inherited and maintained and grown, and never, not once, looked closely enough at the machinery beneath it. She called her chief of staff at 7 in the morning. "I need everything," she said, "the Belford Development Fund, 2018 and 2019. All of it. Legal settlements, contractor communications, internal review records. I need it on my desk by noon." There was a pause. Some of that is archived, and some of it has confidentiality. "I'm the CEO," Meredith said. "Get it." It took 2 days, not 1. Some of it had to be retrieved from legal archiving. Some of it she had to request through channels that made her general counsel visibly nervous, in a way that told her he already knew what she was going to find. The picture that assembled itself was not a surprise, exactly. She had been in finance long enough to recognize the shape of a thing covered up. But knowing the shape of something and seeing the specific details, the specific names, the specific choices made by specific people over specific weeks, that was different. That landed differently. 3 of the board members, who had been on the investment committee in 2019, were still on her board now. She requested a meeting with her general counsel and her head of compliance for the following morning. She told neither of them what it was about. That evening she went home at 6, which was earlier than she had left the office in months. Noah was at the kitchen table doing homework, a glass of orange juice, sweating onto a worksheet about fractions. She sat down across from him. "How was school?" she asked. He looked up with the mild suspicion of a child who has learned that adults ask this question as preamble to something else. "Fine. Anything good?" he considered. "We're doing a project on bridges. Like how they work. I told Mrs. Tennyson that some bridges have engineering problems that people ignore and then they fall down, and she said that was very sobering for a second grader." Meredith looked at her son. He looked back at her. "Where did you learn that?" she asked carefully. "Patrick," he said, simply, without guile. "He told me about this bridge in Minnesota. He said sometimes the people who see the problem aren't the ones who get to fix it." She had to look away for a moment. Out the window, the lawn was dark, the garden beyond it darker. "Mom?" Noah said. "Yeah, are you okay?" "I'm going to be," she said. "I'm working on something." She found Patrick the next morning before 7, when he arrived through the side gate with his truck and his tools, moving quietly the way he always did, not wanting to disturb the house. She was standing at the edge of the patio with 2 cups of coffee, and when he saw her, he stopped. She held out one of the cups. He took it. He did not say anything, neither did she, for a moment. "I know who you are," she said. The expression that crossed his face was not fear. It was not even surprise, exactly. It was the look of someone who has waited a long time for something to arrive and is not quite sure how to receive it now that it's here. "I know about the Belford project," she said. "I know about your memos. I know what they did with them." He looked at the coffee cup in his hands. "I need you to understand something," Meredith said. "I didn't know. That's not an excuse. I should have known. It was my firm's money, my fund structure, and I moved up into this role, and I did not go back and look at what I was inheriting. That's on me. But I didn't know." Patrick was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm not here because of that. I know. I needed work. The agency placed me. I didn't know it was your estate until after I started. I know that too. He looked up. What happens now? Meredith took a sip of her coffee. She had been thinking about this for 3 days. She had thought about it carefully, the way she thought about everything, systematically, from multiple angles, anticipating resistance, planning for contingencies. But underneath the calculation was something simpler that she had stopped trying to suppress. A moral fact that did not need a spreadsheet. Now, she said, I go to work. She went to work. What happened over the next 6 weeks was not dramatic in the way that things are dramatic in movies. It was slow and procedural, and at several points her general counsel looked at her with an expression she could only describe as grief. There were no screaming confrontations. There were meetings, and in the meetings were documents, and in the documents were decisions that a group of people had made in 2019 to protect money over principle. And she laid those decisions out one by one, calmly, the way she laid out financial data, and she explained what she intended to do about them. 2 board members tried to argue. 1 threatened litigation. She had prepared for both. She had been doing this for 15 years, and she was very good at it. And she knew, had always known, she realized, in the way you know things you've been avoiding, that the skill she had spent her career sharpening could be aimed differently if she chose to aim it differently. The settlement with Patrick was handled outside court at her insistence. It was substantial. It included a formal letter of remediation for the Engineering Licensing Board with full documentation of the original memos and the timeline of what the firm's contractors had actually known and when. Whether the board would reinstate his license was not something she could guarantee. But she could give him everything they had taken from him in terms of record. She could make the truth of it documentable. She told him this in the same side patio conversation, 2 months later. Different morning, same gate, no coffee this time because it was July and already humid before 8. I can't fix what happened, she said. I know that. No, he agreed, but there's a record now. If you want to pursue relicensure, you have what you need. He was quiet for a long time. A bird landed on the stone wall and left again. Blythe wants to be an engineer, he said finally. She's 9, and she already wants to be an engineer. She takes apart everything in the house to see how it works. I haven't told her about what happened to my license. I don't know how to explain it to a 9-year-old. Meredith thought about Noah, about bridges in Minnesota, about the things children absorb from the adults around them, whether or not those adults intend to teach. Tell her the truth when she's ready, she said. Tell her that you saw a problem and you reported it, and the people in charge made a different choice, and there were consequences for that. And then tell her that someone eventually went back and looked at the record. Patrick looked at her for a moment that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, just real. Why did you go back and look? He asked. She had asked herself this question a dozen times in the past 2 months. The honest answer was complicated, and she had not fully assembled it yet. There was Noah, and the footage, and the paper crane. There was the shape of an absence, 2 years, personal and family responsibilities, that she had not examined because examining it was not required of her. There was the fact that the man who had been quiet and careful and patient in her garden for 2 months, who had spent 11 minutes making shadow figures for her grieving child by lantern light without asking for anything in return, had once tried to stop something bad from happening and had been silenced for it. But there was also something else. Something she had felt sitting at her desk at midnight, watching the footage for the 3rd time. A recognition, slow and uncomfortable, that she had spent 3 years making herself into a machine of competence, because competence did not require her to be present in any of the ways that actually frightened her. Her husband had been the one who made things feel like home. After he died, she had poured herself into the work, into the performance of capability, into the fiction that moving fast enough meant you could not be touched by the things behind you. Patrick had been, without knowing it, doing the thing she had forgotten how to do, staying slow enough to notice what was needed, staying still enough to be found. I looked, she said, because my son was laughing at midnight in the garden, and I hadn't heard that sound in 2 years, and I needed to understand why. Patrick didn't say anything, and once I started looking, she said I couldn't stop. He nodded once and looked back at the garden. She sold the Belford Fund assets at a structured loss and redirected the capital into a foundation. Not her name on it, she was clear about that. Too many of the problems she was trying to address were ones her firm had created, and she was not interested in the performance of philanthropy. She hired an independent director. She funded it adequately and stepped back. It worked with families of workers in construction-related accidents who had fallen through the gaps of settlements and insurance, the way Patrick had almost fallen, the way the family of the worker who died had fallen. She did not announce any of this. It appeared in the firm's annual disclosure as a restructuring note, 2 paragraphs, appropriately filed. Noah found out about it the way children find out about things. Sideways, overheard, partially understood, and partially invented. He came to her one evening and said, "Did Patrick used to be an engineer?" She considered lying. It would have been easier. "Yes," she said. "Did something bad happen to him?" "Yes." "Did we fix it?" She thought about that word. We tried," she said. "Some things can't be fully fixed. But we made sure the true story was somewhere it could be found." Noah turned this over. Then he said, "Patrick told me that bridges don't fall because of one bad decision. He said they fall because of a lot of small ones that nobody wanted to look at." Meredith looked at her son. "He's right," she said. Noah went back to his homework. She stayed at the kitchen table for a while, not moving, just sitting in the ordinary noise of a house that had started, slowly, to feel like something again. Patrick left at the end of the summer. Not badly. He had enrolled in a continuing education program, working toward the credits he would need for the re-licensure application. He gave her 2 weeks' notice like the professional he had always been. On his last day, he fixed the stone wall section he had been slowly repairing all season, mixed the mortar himself, and set each piece with the unhurried patience she had come to associate with everything he did. Noah gave him the origami crane back. He had kept it all this time in the pocket of the rocket ship pajamas. Patrick held it for a moment, then handed it back. "You keep it," he said. "You know how to make them now." That was not entirely true. Noah had tried 3 times and produced something that looked more like a wounded duck, but he took it with the solemnity of someone receiving something important. A year later, Meredith got a letter. Professional letterhead, an engineering consultancy in Pennsylvania, small firm, 4 people, the kind that did exactly the work Patrick had always been trained to do. He was one of the partners. The letter was brief and unnecessary in any formal sense. There was no legal or financial connection between them anymore, but it was the kind of thing a person writes when they want a record to exist of a different kind. She read it twice and put it on the windowsill in her home office, next to a small origami crane that had been refolded approximately 7 times by a child learning to be patient with the things that take more than one try. The house was not quiet in the same way anymore. It was still large, and her husband was still gone, and there were still nights she sat at her desk too late, watching the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and felt the full weight of what grief actually is. Not a thing you move through, but a thing that moves with you, becoming part of the way you walk. But the sound of Noah in the next room, doing homework, or watching something too loud on his tablet, or practicing the paper crane again with the concentration of someone who has decided it matters. That sound had come back. She had stopped trying to explain why it felt like something being rebuilt, one careful piece at a time, by hands that knew what they were doing.